So we're going to talk about your father, Max Fisher. And we, just for the record, today is the 27th?
Yes, I think, yeah,
Right?
August 27th.
August 27th, 2018. We're in the home of Jane Sherman in Franklin.
Bloomfield Hills.
We're in Bloomfield Hills, Detroit, Michigan. And we're going to, like we said, we're going to talk about, but before we talk about your father, just if you can just introduce yourself to me and your connection to Max.
My connection to Max?
Just
Well,
for the record.
my connection to Max is he's my father. He was my father. I'm the eldest child. I was the only one from the first marriage. And I probably the one in the family that shares his interests the most, followed in his footsteps.
Which is?
Being involved in the Jewish
Which
community, both locally and globally.
Philanthropy.
In philanthropy, yeah.
Tell me.
That doesn't mean the rest aren't philanthropic.
Of course.
My role is the Jewish area.
Is the Jewish area. Tell me about your father. Tell me about his background, where he was born, and what kind of house he grew up in.
Well, that's a little tougher. My father was born in Pittsburgh, Ohio. His father was a merchant, with a
push cart?
Well, just about. They moved to Salem, Ohio when
Okay.
my father was, I think, 2 or 3 years old. He was the only Jew in his high school. He played on the football team. They used to call him the rabbi. He grew up in Salem in a kosher home. And he used to, when he learned how to drive, he'd have to go to Cleveland to bring back kosher food. He had really no formal Jewish education, none.
So the house that he grew up in was just...
It was Jewish. No, it was Jewish, and my
Jewish.
grandmother kept Jewish and kept kosher.
Kept kosher.
And did Friday night. They were not Shomer Shabbat. I don't think so in those days, anyway.
Were his parents immigrants?
Yes, both his parents were immigrants from Russia.
Okay.
White Russia.
White Russia.
White Russia. His was an arranged marriage.
Okay.
My grandfather came first, then he brought over my grandmother 2 years later.
So they got married in the old country, basically. And then came here.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. So White Russia, just for the record, it's Belarus.
Belarus, yeah.
Yeah.
One of the towns I think is Lekovich.
Okay.
I don't remember the other one.
And is he the eldest? Is Max the eldest?
Yes, my father's the eldest. He had 3 sisters. Two are no longer living, as is my father. My eldest aunt is 96 years old, and she was the youngest of the 4.
And where is she?
She lives right around the corner here. So.
What year was your father born?
My father was born in 1908. Excuse me,
Just like my grandmother.
Yeah, 1908. He, as I say, he grew up in Salem.
Where is Salem exactly?
Ohio, someplace south of
Cleveland?
Cleveland, Columbus, all that.
Okay.
That whole area. He went to Ohio State on a football scholarship, but he
Is he a big guy?
well, in today's records, he wouldn't be a good. I mean, he was 6'2", but he was very thin.
Okay.
But you think of football players today as big, husky guys. He was not. I would not say he. But he injured his knee his first. They played offense and defense.
Right.
He injured his knee in first year, so he was no longer part of on the football team. But he did. His first Jewish experience in a Jewish education was he walked into a Hillel when he was involved at
Columbus, at the university.
Ohio State. Yeah.
Just a second. I want to do one thing. Sorry, this is my. Just want to check. Okay, before we get to your father going to university, so he grew up in a kind of like Jewish home, but not like Orthodox or anything like that. But the basic things were there. They kept kosher. They did Shabbat.
I think they did Shabbat. They had a little blue box from J&F.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's it as far as I know. But I really feel that he had the first formal Jewish place he was ever in was a Hillel.
It was a Hillel house at the University of Ohio.
No, Ohio State.
Ohio State. Sorry.
Oh,
sorry.
it's a bad word.
I'm sorry about that.
So that was his first Jewish experience.
Did he ever tell you about that experience?
What, going into Hillel? No,
Yeah.
no.
But he did mention
My
it.
father was not very demonstrative about his formal life. I mean, he talked about his business life more so than he did about anything else. I knew this because when I started keeping kosher, my father thought I became Orthodox. I mean, he just said, "What do you mean you're turning into koshering your home? What's the matter with you?" He did not go to synagogue. The only time he ever went to synagogue was on Yom Kippur because he opened the Ark at Shaar Tzedek. He didn't like it. He didn't like formal Jewish, but it had, you know, it had nothing to do with his involvement with the Jewish people and his support for the Jewish people.
Well, that's, yeah. So he goes to Ohio State.
Graduates from Ohio State.
And what does he graduate in?
He graduated with, I think, a Bachelor of Science degree.
Okay.
He was offered a job by Hall Brothers, I think it's Hall Brothers, to go sell there. And he decided to come to work, go to work for his father in Detroit. His parents had by then moved to Detroit. And he was selling crank oil. They take oil out of the cars and they refine it and they sell it. And he started in with his father, but it didn't work out really well, and he found two partners and he opened up what became Aurora Gasoline Company. They started buying unrefined oil and refining it and selling it to gas stations. He got two partners. He left his father and went into this other business, and that's really where he made his fortune, if you want to say.
What years? This is like 19.
And this has got to be in the 30s, late 30s.
In the late 30s.
Yeah, he was already in the oil business by the time I was born. I was born in 38. So
you were born in 38. Okay. Yeah. So the 30s in Detroit, there's I forget his name, Father
Coughlin.
Right. There's some sort of.
Well, I don't know if he was in the 30s so much as in the 40s. He was on the.
He was on the radio.
On the radio. His church was on 12 Mile Road in Woodward, and he was a real anti-Semite. Real anti-Semite.
No, I know. I think it was actually he did start in the 30s, in the late.
Did he?
The
okay.
Second half of the 30s. But what I'm trying to get here is was your father at all? Yeah.
Turn it
on. We're gonna have
Val.
So the reason I'm asking, because in Detroit at that time, and all these questions are leading up to your father's, like you said, he wasn't a religious guy, but he had this certain desire to help world Jewry, and that was a very important thing. What I'm trying to pull out.
What
of you,
brought it about?
What do you think were these motives that
It's interesting because I never ever questioned him. Mm-hmm. I had heard from lots of people my mother had a great influence on him before she passed away in 1952. I think, and I never discussed with him what he felt about what was going on in Europe during World War II.
Yeah.
I never ever got to that point of discussion. So I don't know if that was what had the effect on him. And I think if you read his biography, there was nothing in there about that either. So I'm guessing that he was brought up in an atmosphere that you help the Jewish people, and he just went on to do it a lot.
Right, because there's philanthropy and then there's Jewish philanthropy. I mean, there's philanthropy of, of like being a human being and helping unprivileged people and children and education. And then there's also the philanthropy of.
Well, I can't say he believed in both, but he believed that Jews, and this is why we run this program, this Fisher-Felipe program, should be giving to Jews first. And he felt very strongly about that. Okay. He also was very involved with the city of Detroit. He felt very strongly that he had to get back to the city that helped him make his fortune. So it wasn't just Jewish philanthropy, but basically his mind was set in Jewish philanthropy first and foremost.
And philanthropy in general. So,
yeah.
So if Max is born in 1908, already when the war. You're a year old when the war begins in 1939. You're 3 years old when America enters the war. He's already deep in business. He's not going into the army. He's 40.
No.
He's 30.
He's 30. He's in his 30s.
He's in his 30s. Is there anything that you know about that he did do during the war here in Detroit, or
no?
Was he...
I can't give you an answer to that.
Okay.
I think he was more focused on his business, on my mother being so ill. We used to travel back and forth to Tucson, Arizona on a train.
Did she have TB?
No, she had a heart issue. She had a bad valve that she got from rheumatic fever as a child. And she was never supposed to have children. And so, you know, today it's nothing. They replaced the valve.
Right.
But in the 30s, it was serious.
It was a serious deal.
So I don't think that, and nobody ever had this conversation. And when I read his book, which I did, read The Galleys, I read that, there was never anything in there either. So we never got to that part of the conversation. But I do know that he was involved, and because when I was 1947, November 1947, I remember exactly where I was sitting. We were living in the Lee Plaza Hotel, waiting for the house to be finished, and listening
in Detroit.
Yeah, in Detroit, and listening to the vote. I can remember the radio where I sat, where my father was sitting, listening to the radio on the vote of the UN, and it was my first experience. So obviously, my father had a big impact
on
yeah.
you.
Well, he obviously had a big influence on me, but that he obviously he was involved by then, and he was.
So you clearly remember.
Oh, I can remember
radio, the vote.
That's the only thing I remember as a child. I remember getting under tables and
Sure. But you remember that situation of.
sitting in the hotel. It was we had an apartment there. It wasn't a hotel room.
And Max's philanthropy with the State of Israel begins in the early 50s.
In the early 50s.
If I, from what I read.
Yes, in the early 50s. He was convinced to, wait a second, turn it on. Val!
Let's talk about Max's philanthropy with the State of Israel and how it started.
Well, as far as I know, he went to Israel in the early 50s with the UJA mission. And I don't think it was on the first mission. You know, this was top leadership. This was not like they take missions today. They take they took, you know, top Detroit leadership and world leadership. I think it was on the second mission that he met Levi Eshkol. And made the famous statement. He said, "Why don't you stop the immigrants from coming in?" My father literally asked him this, and he said, "That's not what the State of Israel is."
Levi Eshkol said that they should stop the immigrants.
No, my father said to Levi Eshkol, because they were trying to raise more money, and he said, "You know, we need this money tomorrow." And my father said, "We can't get it that fast." I mean, I'm projecting what the conversation is. You know, if you stop the immigrants from coming in for a while, we can catch up. And Levi Eshkol said, "The State of Israel is for every Jew. Whenever they come in, we'll never close the door." And I think that's got had the same impact that on my father as it has on me just saying it today. I mean, thinking about it and saying it, it's very moving to me. So I imagine that was probably, you know, a strong enough comment, seeing them living in Marlborough Road and the conditions they were in, and you can't bring more in, and Eshkol says to him, "We'll never close the door for any Jew." So I think that probably was a major impact.
And already at that time, in the early 50s, mid 50s, your father's very well established, both in Detroit and all around the United States, and he has decided to take on himself a leading role. So
he becomes campaign chairman, president of the Detroit Federation. Then he goes on to the UJA, United Jewish Appeal. I think in the late 50s he was. It wasn't during 63, so it was before 63, raising money. And he went from that job. He took on other roles nationally. He became president of Council of Jewish Federations, which was the precursor of Jewish Federations in North America, or the joint UJA, CJF, in 1970, 71, and he was president there. And then he went on in 72. He had already become involved with the Jewish Agency for Israel.
Okay.
And in 72, he and Louis Pinkus sat down because and had meetings because the world Jewish community that was contributing the money was not getting their say in what was going on. We were sending the money to the Jewish Agency. And they were the Zionists, and I don't say this pejoratively, but they were living there. They were spending the money wherever. And the feeling in the world Jewish community was that we should have a say in what's going on with the money we're sending you. And it was millions and millions of dollars in those days. So he sat down with Louis Pinkus.
Who's Louis Pinkus?
Louis Pinkus was the his title was, I don't think at that time, was he chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency? Probably. He was chairman of the executive of the Jewish Agency, South African, by the way. And he became, they sat down with others from both sides and created a new document, was they called it the Reconstitute of the Jewish Agency for Israel, where the Zionists had 50% vote and the fundraisers, for lack of a better word.
When you mean the Zionists, you mean the people
world's,
in Israel?
Yeah, no,
Like
they weren't all the people, the Zionists were not in Israel. Some of them were other places in the world.
They were
but
all board members of the Jewish Agency.
Yes, but the Zionists represented different parties, and so 50% of the vote belonged to them, and 50% of the vote belonged to the world fundraisers. That's how they decided to.
This was in 1972.
1972, and that's how the partnership began. He became chairman. He was chairman, I think, of the Jewish Agency. He was chairman of the board, it's called. Louis Pinchas was chairman of the executive, but he soon passed away, and he was replaced by, I don't remember. I have to look it up.
It's okay.
So the fundraisers throughout the world became very involved in what was going on, which was a good thing.
Yeah, because all of a sudden they can track their money. They have a
Well,
say.
it's not even so much tracking their money, it's getting them involved.
Right.
That's how I got involved. I mean, that's what happened. Now, he went on to, in 78, he was still chairman, I believe in 78, when Begin was prime minister, and they instituted the first reform program, supposedly called Project Renewal, Shikkum Shunot.
Shikkum Shkunot,
Yeah. Which was supposed to take these bad communities, not bad communities, these underprivileged communities throughout the state of Israel.
We're talking about Sderot, Netivot, Yerucham.
You're talking
Arad.
but you're talking about communities in Jerusalem. You're talking
Sure.
about
Katamoni,
you're talking
Shonat
about
Hatikva,
Shanat Hatikva.
Givat Olga.
You're right. You got them all. I mean, I'll could list all 80 of them.
Now I know. Yeah, now we're on. Yeah.
So they tried to, the concept was that you were going to use the involvement of the community members to bring the community up rather than the top telling down. Now, it worked in some communities, it did not work in others.
In which communities did it work that you remember? You know the neighborhood Musrara in
Yes,
Jerusalem?
Musar.
Yeah.
That's where it started, by the way. That's
And why did it start there?
That's because the group, I don't remember, the Black Panthers started there. I heard them screaming, I think it was June of 1973, 74, at the Jewish Agency board. We went to a meeting, and they were carrying on. And I think Musrara became one of the communities. Hatikva even is much better today than it was.
Oh, for sure. And so is Musrara.
Yeah. Better today. A lot of them had great results. I mean, they all had good results, but none of them had, very few.
The thing with Musrara is that the community leaders there, Charlie Beaton and all these guys, they were hardcore, and they
sat down at the table.
Well, they met with Golda, who totally kind of brushed them off, and she was like, "They're not well mannered," and that was her famous.
Oh, you guys.
Famous.
That I didn't.
Where it just exploded, but these and undeveloped neighborhoods, like you said, the idea was to bring the local leadership to take the responsibility.
I remember having a meeting in Tel Aviv with the mayor and the residents from Hatikva screaming because the education system was so bad there. I mean, I remember sitting around the table, there were 20, 25 of us. They were screaming at the mayor because the education system in Hatikva was so much worse than it was in South Tel Aviv, North Tel Aviv. North Tel Aviv. And they took a part in it, and they insisted that he increase the educational program before they did anything else. Some communities, it was picking up the garbage. It was all across the country.
For you and your father to see these neighborhoods, because a lot of people think a lot of people that are not connected think of as Israel as some sort of utopia where all the Jews live and everything's fine. For you and also for your father, I mean, apparently seeing this made you guys put these things into priority and set an agenda of how to fix it.
Along with the United Jewish Appeal at the time. I think that then the issue became into the 80s when the problem with the Soviet Jewry came out. That's really what, by then he was out of the chairmanship of the Jewish Agency, but he was the president, he was the man that went into the White House.
Okay, tell me about that.
Okay.
We're talking, because I remember, and just like a little on a personal note, I remember 1980, 81, 82 here in Detroit. I remember meetings at my parents' house of, small meetings of, helping Soviet Jewry. And I also remember my grandmother lived on Greenfield in Southfield. She lived in not in an old age home, but like...
She lived in the senior
Yeah.
apartments, yes,
Yeah.
the Federation Apartments.
And it was filled with Russians.
Well, that was later. That was not in the...
Early 80s.
No, very few in the early 80s. They really didn't be coming out until later. There were some, but it was
Okay.
not... in fact, we didn't really start taking them until the doors of Russia opened up in the 90s.
Right, but things are happening before. How does Max get involved?
Okay, Max, first of all, he was always involved. Nothing went on in the Jewish world without Max being involved.
Okay.
Okay? I don't care what his position was. He was the one that had the stake in the White House. He could walk into that door at any time and talk to any Republican president, which happened to be in there at that time. But
Was Max affiliated with the Republican Party?
Max was the major fundraiser for the Republican. Now, believe it or not, until Franklin Roosevelt ran for his third term, he was a Democrat.
Okay.
But after that, he didn't think any president should be in office for more than 8 years, and so he became a diehard Republican. He supported Republican, and he didn't want anything from it. He was offered all sorts of jobs by Nixon, Reagan, anybody, Ford, Bush. He said, he was offered, he could have been secretary of this, secretary of that, ambassador. Ambassador, he said, I only want it. He said, I'm not doing this
for myself.
I want to be able to pick up that phone or walk in that office and have the ear of the President of the United States.
So tell me about the story of the Soviet Jewry. When does that start to bubble with him?
Well, that's
60s,
hard.
70s?
No, I think it's probably the late 70s.
Yeah.
When it became, I mean, it may have become known before that. In fact, Natan tells me a story. The first time he met my father was walking out of, it couldn't have been George Mitchell's. Was George Mitchell in office after Sharansky came out of?
No, Schultz was.
Maybe. But it was George Schultz. He saw my father. They didn't know each other. He came out of Schultz's office and my father went in. I mean, Natan tells me that story all the time. So that was already in the late 80s because Sharansky came out in 85. Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah. So, and when was the march? 84. In Washington.
I don't remember.
I think it was.
I don't remember. But Max we go back in time into the late 70s.
He was involved. First of all, there was the Jackson-Vanik Amendment.
Okay, what's that?
That was an amendment that you got special rights if your humanity was good to the Jews. I think the Jackson-Vanik Amendment was a push on Russia to start doing something. And you never heard of the Jackson-Vanik Amendment?
I don't know. No, I haven't. I know about the early 70s exodus of the first wave of Jews that came to Israel in the early 70s.
Yeah.
And they were in Russia was in such a bad economical state that Israel traded oranges for
the Russians.
And that's where the first wave
But then they had the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, which started to put pressure on Russia. Then we went through this whole thing with the refuseniks, which was, we were all my father, interestingly enough, never went to Russia. I went 4 times. I was at every shtetl in the former Soviet Union.
During the Soviet time?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I haven't been to. We were in. No, we were in Berlin. I haven't been to Russia since
the
I was in Kiev.
In Kiev.
I was in Kiev.
Okay.
We're going to St. Petersburg next year because I've never been there.
Beautiful.
But every shtetl, in the 80s when we went. Now my father never went, and I don't know if he was concerned about his safety or just didn't want to travel.
Sure.
But I went. I was like a spy and everything. He used to call me on the phone. Okay, what happened here? What happened? Well, I never took notes on anything, which was bad probably. No, he wanted to know, a different viewpoint. I used to sit in all the meetings for the Jewish Agency, and when he would negotiate he was still negotiating between the Zionists and what we call the fundraisers 20 years later. There's still problems. In fact, I wish he was around today because we need him. But he became very involved, and he went to the president. I think it was Reagan at the time, right before the doors opened.
It was Reagan.
It was Reagan that went to Gorbachev.
Yeah.
He was very, very involved at that stage. In fact, I remember, and I don't know if you interviewed Les Wexner. He wasn't involved in those days. And we went to Les Wexner's for a dinner honoring my father, and Gorbachev was there. And I went over and I said to him, this had to be 20 years ago, I thanked him for letting the Jews out. And I sat across the table from him all night. He never took his eyes off of me. We were hysterical. Anyway, he was very, he's the one that pushed Reagan. Oh, you all right? You want some more water? Your water's in the other room.
So he really had that much of an input on Reagan, for example?
Oh, he had it on all the Nixon. Listen, you've got to know the story in 1973 that he and Simcha Dinitz went in.
Simcha Dinitz was the ambassador at the
That's
time.
correct.
No, Rabin was the ambassador.
No, Dinitz was the ambassador. 1973, Dinitz was the ambassador. And he and Dinitz went to see Nixon. He called Nixon on the phone. And Kissinger was in the room. And it was because of them, Nixon he sent the arms to Israel, the planes and everything else. It was my father and Simcha Dinitz and Henry Kissinger did not want to do it.
Really?
No.
What was his,
do I know? You can ask Henry.
He wasn't into it.
He didn't, but they did it, and it saved the state of Israel. And that's a very, I'm not saying this because he's my father. I'm saying this because it's true, and you can read it anybody.
No, you're talking about historical facts.
Yeah.
He was a person who could pick up the phone and speak to the president.
That's correct. That's all he wanted.
Nixon or Ford or Carter or
not Carter.
Not Carter.
And I said Republican presidents. Republican presidents.
Carter, he probably had no access to.
I don't know if he had any access to. I was once in the Carter White House with UJA. I don't know if he had access, but not the access like he had to Nixon.
To the Republicans.
Because he had raised millions of dollars for these guys.
And they also, the fact that what you're telling me about your father not wanting to take any job or be an ambassador, he didn't want that. He just wanted
This is what he wanted.
That access.
That's exactly what
he wanted. The access, and he wanted it to be on that level.
That's exactly.
I don't need anything. If I need anything from you, I'm going to call you. Then you can help me, but don't give me a job. That's not going to.
Well, he didn't exactly say that, but that's what he meant, and he said that.
We're talking about the subtext.
Yeah.
We're talking about the subtext, because I'm trying to understand his state of mind of being a person.
And he said that
in a very privileged situation where he can walk into the White House, quote unquote.
He could, and they would answer.
And Soviet Jewry is one issue. The Yom Kippur War.
The Yom Kippur War was first, Soviet Jewry, and then the third one was the Ethiopian mass immigration.
Mm-hmm. Was he involved with that also?
Yes. In one on it was 91. 91?
Well, there was two.
He was involved in Operation Moses, but not to the extent.
It was much smaller.
The Jewish Agency was involved in Operation Moses, so because it was the Yehuda dominance that broke the story, and they had to stop Operation Moses at the time. They were all living in Sudan, and we all knew about it because we were sitting in the Jewish Agency, and I'm saying we all because I was involved too. But when that story broke in the New York Times about Ethiopians being pushed out of Sudan, and there was fabulous stories that you should read about how they took them out by boat, and they had this resort on the Sudanese border, on the Sudanese beach. I mean, it's a fabulous story, but it doesn't involve my dad. But he was involved in that, and then in 1991, when we paid $35 million to the Ethiopian government to get out the 14,000 Jews. And the fact that it was over Memorial Day, and we left the check, they sent the check, and this was all within the Jewish Agency, but my father had major input into this, and then the check, of course, was never cashed because what's his name?
The dictator. I forget his name.
I do too.
Yeah.
Left. It's not Idi Amin. It's the
No,
other.
it's not Idi Amin. It's not Haile Selassie either.
It was Idi Amin was in
Uganda.
Yeah. I'll think of it. I'll come to.
So
He had involvement in that too.
So where did the money come from to get them out?
$35 million was Jewish Agency money. We had raised it from the American World Jewish Community. But the cash was never checked because he left. And I think some money was. We paid to get Jews out from all over the world. And my father was chairman of the Jewish Agency when we were paying Romania millions in the 70s.
What was that all about?
The same thing.
Ceausescu, he pocketed on every person.
They were giving it, and Rabbi Rosen, who was he was the Jew in the community, was making sure the money got through, so the Romanians came out. I mean, this was
and also the Soviet Jews that left in the 70s would have to go through Romania
to get to Israel.
And Ceausescu would pocket, I think, $500 on every head or something like that. There was some kind of. So he was involved in all of these.
That because it all was through the Jewish Agency. And the Joint Distribution Committee obviously had some involvement, but not as much. And as chairman of the Jewish Agency, he was involved in every one of these.
So would the Israeli government contact your father and say, listen, we have a situation in Romania.
I think they worked hand in hand. The Jewish Agency and the Israeli government worked hand in hand on this. I mean, we had people in the field as well as they did. So it wasn't, we transported them, or we provided the money, the Jewish Agency, I don't mean we, and the government, they worked together. I don't know how because I wasn't there, but I do know. I remember when my second trip to Israel, which was not till the 70s, we went through Romania, and we came on the train. We were on a train with Romanians going from Romania to, we met the train in Vienna.
In Vienna,
and flew to Israel with them.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. I remember flying to Israel with the Romanians. Yes.
They probably just had their shirts on them.
Yeah, I remember they gave us. We got checked terrible. I mean, they really checked us out to leave the country. But it's very exciting. We've flown with Soviets to the Soviet Union. You fly with the Ethiopians out of Ethiopia to Israel. It's very exciting to fly with.
Let's talk a little bit about your father's relationships with the Israeli prime ministers.
Okay.
Okay, let's kind of like
goes all the way back.
Okay, well, let's.
Okay.
First,
even to Ben Gurion.
Let's talk about.
I don't know how close he was to Ben Gurion, but I knew him well. I don't know even Moshe Sharett, who you know who Moshe Sharett is? He was the second. But a lot of people don't.
Actually, his real name was, of course.
Most people don't know who he was.
A lot of people don't know, but Israelis do.
Yeah,
definitely.
Okay, so then Ben Gurion came back in, and then it was Eshkol.
Eshkol came in '63.
Yeah, but he was.
But Eshkol was.
Eshkol was the minister of treasury when my father met him.
Development.
Okay, whatever it was.
Eshkol was a guy who made things work. He was a real bureaucrat who, just made things work. Yeah. So.
So Eshkol, he was. I don't think he was. It's too early for me to tell. I don't know how close he was to Eshkol. So who was after Eshkol? Golda he was close to. He had a relationship with her. He could pick up the phone. And then Rabin came in next.
Yep.
Rabin I know because I was with him, and with my father dozens of times. Dozens of times. Very close relationship with Rabin and a very close relationship with Peres.
With both of them?
Both of them.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Yeah.
In fact, he's probably was close to Peres as anybody.
Peres, do you think was the one that he was closest
to? Maybe that's putting my own personal thing in. It may be me.
Okay.
Because I was so close to Peres.
You were close to Peres, yeah.
And then Sharon.
What about Begin?
Oh, Begin, yes, they learned to, yes, they were together.
You're hesitating.
No, because I'm going back and I'm remembering at the Jewish Agency annual meeting in Jerusalem, and it must have been, let's see, David was 17, so it must have been 88.
Begin was already out.
Well, then it must have been 78.
Yeah, it
must have been 78. Excuse me, I added wrong. 78. They were together. They used to do the ending meeting of the Jewish Agency Assembly in the Knesset in front of the Chagall windows, the Chagall tapestries. And I remember Begin speaking, and then I remember that's when they talked about Project Renewal. My father getting up and saying something about Jewish education, that it was so important. And my son hitting me, he says, why doesn't Pops practice what he preaches? Because, you know, he got up and he said every Jewish kid should learn Hebrew. Now my father couldn't read a word of Hebrew, didn't know one letter from the next. So I remember, so Begin, and he had a good relationship with Begin because he was very, they started this Project Renewal program together, and I don't know how warm it was, close, but he could pick up the phone and call any prime minister. Bibi, in fact, Bibi was the first prime minister that called, well, he wasn't prime minister, when my father died, picked up the phone and called me. Called me immediately. Now, I knew him personally, but he didn't call my stepmother, called me. Sharon was in office at the time, and I got a note from him, but
Bibi was the first. Yeah.
Bibi was the first. That's a personal story. He picked up the phone and called me when my father died. In fact, I remember where I was driving. So, and even though well, I'm not going to say it on tape. Stop.
You don't have to. It's and of course there was Itzhak Shamir also.
Yes.
But he had personal relationships with all the prime ministers because they either felt that he was somebody that could help solve some sort of issues, or
because of his who he was. He was Max Fisher. He was the man that could do it. When it came to the Jewish community, he had I don't know if the control, but the respect of everybody. The respect of everyone. And he could create consensus among any group, any Jewish group, I'm sure any Republican group.
Between
he couldn't do it with his kids, but he could do it with everybody else.
Of course, that's a classic. That's classic. If you can't make peace at home, at least try to make peace. Or like we say in Hebrew, the shoemaker walks barefoot. You know, so. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get from this short time that we do have together some sort of portrait and understanding of who your father was and what he did and how important it was for him. And not only that, but it also left an imprint and an input on you and what you do.
Okay, the best thing, I hate to do this because I don't like to talk about my father. I mean,
we are here talking about your father. So.
That he was the man that the Jewish community could count on at any time to make peace. He was, it's often said today, we need Max here. When I had to reconstitute the Jewish Agency, I only wished he was sitting in that room with me. He had the respect of every person in the Jewish world, and I'm sure of everyone, because he never put himself first, but he also could be able to take two groups here and a group here and a group here and create consensus, and they knew that. And they walked into a room and this side would say their point and this side would say their point, and Max would make the decision and everybody listened. Now I can't say what brought him to do that, but he would sit and listen and he would know the correct answer.
Did he have a gift in compromising between people?
Yes, that's what I'm saying, create consensus. Consensus. He was the ultimate consensus maker. And he believed if everybody went away unhappy, he'd done the job. Done his job properly. And, you know, to me, he wasn't big. You know, lots of people, oh, my father's Max Fisher, this and that. You know, he's my father. I mean, I didn't look at him any differently than I would look at anybody else. My relationship, probably the smartest thing my father did when you asked me is that how he left his statement is that he sent Larry and I to Israel in 1961 in the first Young Leadership Mission. And as I told you, I wanted to make Aliyah, and we didn't make Aliyah. And my life revolved around the Jewish community, and particularly the state of Israel. And I have to, if my father had told me to go get involved in Israel and Jewish causes, it would have never happened.
Of course, because he would have told you to.
Yeah.
But he showed you.
Yeah.
Instead
And
of
that was probably the.
What do you think? What year did Max pass away?
Excuse me. It's been 2005.
2005.
Yeah.
What in his last years?
He wanted to know everything. He was still involved. I'll tell you a story. February 2005, I went to the Jewish agencies. He was in the hospital. And before I left, the government of Israel, Bibi was Minister of Finance at the time.
Yes. 2005?
Yeah. And the Jewish agency owed us $450 million. I mean, it's unimportant for me to, I mean, the government of Israel and the Jewish agency owed the Jewish agent. I think it was, in a dozen places, it was for past youth Aliyah villages, it was for absorption centers, it doesn't make any difference. And Carol Solomon, who was chairman of the Jewish agency at the time, and I went.
And you do not, yeah, I hear the, it's okay.
Were charged with going to see Bibi to get the money back. And I walk into Bibi's office, and the first thing comes out, he wanted to know how my dad was. Well, my father said to me before he went, he knew I was going. He says, "Don't you walk out of that room without the money." Now, he's in the hospital. It's a month before he's passed away. He's hooked up to tubes here and there, everywhere.
And he tells you?
Tells me, don't go. And I walk into the room, and Bibi comes out, and the first thing he asked me is how my father is. And I said to him, my father said to me, "Don't walk out of this room without that $450 million. And as it turned out, we got the $450 million. And I walked out, and he said, okay. The whole meeting was, it was a half an hour, 45 minutes, I don't remember. And I walked out of the room, and I picked up the phone, and I called my father back. And he was as lucid as could be. And that went on up until a few days before he died. I mean, he wanted to know from me. I said it was his spite.
97 years old?
He was just going to be almost 97. He wanted to know what was going on in the Jewish world. From me. Now, he may have asked my siblings something else, but he had to know exactly what was going on. So he was as aware. When I came home, I had to, by then he was home. I had to go over everything that had happened in that meeting. So that's how attuned he was, and
Wow.
how much a part of his life this was.
Wow, that story basically tells it all. That basically does tell it all.
Yeah. I mean, it's.
And what do you think that he? I mean, I'm not going to ask. Actually, I'm going to ask about you. Today, when you look at what's happening in Israel, not politically, we're not going to talk about politics. Socially, economically, there's been a lot of protests within society.
Well, against the new law.
Not only I'm not even talking about that.
Which
we
one?
can talk about that. In 2012, there started to be grassroots movements against what's going on in Israel socially and economically.
Okay, well, I can talk about that.
That we're talking about that the cost of living is just rocketing.
No,
People
the
can't afford
cottage
houses.
cheese was too much.
Yeah, exactly. The cottage cheese, or we call it the milky, which is like
I know.
What's your input on that whole situation? What do you think? Because it's a different problem now as things change.
Well, first of all, I think some of that is political. Some of that is political.
I'm not, when I mean political, I mean internal, like we can talk about internal politics.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
No, I'm not talking about that.
Okay.
I'm talking about the issue of whether housing you can't afford, nobody can afford to live in Jerusalem because the housing's too expensive there. And I have 5 Ethiopian children. I know one of my daughters just went to look for an apartment. She lived in Jaffa and they wanted to move to a bigger apartment. What it costs and what they had to, I mean, it's unbelievable. I don't know if it's any different than it is here, that apartment rentals are so high. But I'm more concerned when you talk about socially about the underclass.
Okay.
And that's my take on all of this. That you've got 350,000 children at risk in Israel today.
Yeah.
Well, here is a country that we're the people of the book.
Right.
These kids can't learn to read or write, and most of them a great deal, about 60-70% of them are Ethiopians. We never finished the job. And I think my father would agree with this. We brought in the Yemenites, we brought in the Moroccans, they're all doing very well. Ben Gurion made the comment when a Moroccan's head of the state of Israel has a position of the cabinet, we never did the job with the Ethiopians. We did a very poor job. And basically, now, not all, a majority.
350,000?
Kids at risk in Israel today. They're not all Ethiopians, but a great percentage of them.
A great percentage of them.
I believe, and I don't know, I believe my father said, we have a commitment to them. We as the world Jewish community. We brought them into Israel. We said, we're going to make a home for you. And we haven't done the job properly. We flunked. The Ethiopian immigration, we flunked it. It wasn't tough with the Russian immigration. You have a bright, much brighter, much more.
They definitely had their challenges, like
But they all have their challenges.
Right,
but they came in with some sort of education.
They weren't drinking water out of the toilet.
That's right, and they knew about running water and toys, and the world was round. Now the Ethiopians that come in today are not quite as backward as the ones that came in 20 years ago, but it's a generational thing that we have not been able to correct. And I believe that's the biggest problem. And I would have to say my father would agree with me, the fact that we haven't done our job, finished our job.
Specifically with Ethiopia?
No, with all the immigrants we brought in. We haven't finished the job until they're all viable, productive citizens of the country. We have not finished our job. Now, because the housing is too expensive I don't know if that's an issue that the American or world Jewish community can deal with.
Right.
And I think it isn't. I think it's a government issue.
Oh, for sure it's a government issue.
And the fact that cottage cheese is too expensive. But that's a very socialistic outlook, too. Here in the United States, nobody's going to complain that milk is too expensive. And do they get whatever the government puts on it? The milk subsidy. We don't get subsidies on milk.
No.
That's the way, but it's still a social, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. That's a very socialistic attitude.
But and I know that Israel has, if you look at how Israel was in 1977 when the Labor Party ended its monopoly and, Israel has social issues where health and education, but it's not a socialistic country.
No, but I said that was a social.
Definitely Bibi and other people have definitely taken apart the electricity company and the phone company and the bus and Egged and all,
made them all go private.
Of course, it doesn't exist anymore.
But you often understand you're spending, 51% of your budget on defense?
Exactly.
That's the other issue. Yeah. Now, can the world Jewish community solve that problem? No.
But the world Jewish community could definitely help, and I don't say help solve the problem of things that you're talking about, social issues and education. And I mean, the project that your father started in Shikun.
Project Renewal, Shikun Shino.
That still is till today in Israel, that is so vital to so many people.
Is it really?
Absolutely.
Because I haven't, we started another one partnership together, and then we did this.
It's part of the lexicon. It's part of the language in Hebrew. I mean, that word is everybody knows what that means.
Okay.
Everybody knows what the Shikun project is. It's still,
Well, it's turned into Partnership 2000 is what it's turned into.
It's definitely, well, you know, everything has to be revived and things need to be changed, but I just think that, you know, how are we doing on time?
Well, you know, I could come back. I've got a chiropractor appointment.
And so should we do
I would
5
be
more
go-
minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So to wrap things up, and just to make things, just to wrap things up, we could sit here and talk about a lot of people who have helped the state of Israel, but we're talking now specifically about Max. And we talked about his access to the United States president and to the prime ministers, and being a person who wants to
Build consensus.
build consensus and is not looking for a political gain and doesn't need a political gain, and it didn't really interest him. What can you tell me, this is the last question, I want you to give me an insight, something about him from you being his daughter and also you being somebody who worked with him. I mean, what were the things that stood out in his personality?
Well, that's a tough question. Well, the number one, as I told you earlier, he never told me what to do, so that's probably why I did it. He showed me by example, and he believed by doing things by example. And I was hooked. Working with him was like a spy, though I became involved and I followed his positions. And I would hope I got these positions. For years, nobody in the Jewish world knew I was Max Fisher's daughter. I had the...
Oh, really?
No. I had the beauty...
You had the Sherman...
Sherman name. I mean, that's not to say the chairman of the Jewish Agency didn't know, or...
But you didn't walk into a meeting and hold up a sign, I'm Max's daughter.
No, and nobody... I never told anybody. There were two experiences happened. I had to introduce my father. He was honored in Ramla, which was our Project Renewal community.
Ramla.
Yeah. And they had built, he and Al Taubman had built the Jewish Community Center, and they had this whole big thing, and Peres was supposed to come and speak. And I don't remember what happened, but Peres did not come. And I had to get up and I introduced this whole thing, and I introduced Max, and I called him Max and what he'd done, or Mr. Fisher, and he gets up in the front of his, she'll never tell you this, but that's my daughter. And the noise in the room was awesome. Somebody else did it at another meeting. In fact, Vivian did it here at a women's division meeting. I mean, many, many years ago. I never ever, because I wanted to achieve my position in the Jewish world because of me, not because of whom. Now, that's not saying that I didn't get positions. I obviously had access to people because of who he was.
Sure.
But I felt it was important I proved my way. So that's, I loved spending the hours with him that we could discuss the issues that interested us both.
Could you give me just one example of an issue that you guys really was very passionate for the both of you? Just
on both sides?
On
No,
both
passionate was politics. I was a Democrat, he was a Republican. Drove him crazy. I used to have to call him on the phone and tell him, I'm putting my name, I think it was Don Regal, ran for senator. I said, I'm putting my name on Don Regal's stationery. I want you to know it before it goes on. I don't want you to read it or hear it. And, he used to drive me crazy, but I once went to a meeting, it was I remember this, Golda Meir spoke at the GA in Dallas. And somebody comes over to me, he says, I understand you're Max Fisher's daughter. And I said, I am. He says, you're the one that's a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party. And I got hysterical because I realized what he wanted, when he wanted something with a Democratic tone. I was not a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party, but he wanted to use this as a thing. When Ronald Reagan ran for president, and I decided to support him, he says, you got to go tell all your friends. And I said, I can't. This is not a for Reagan, it's against Carter. But listen, we had some presidents Republican presidents did great things. Nixon, listen, without Nixon, Israel wouldn't be it was today. Without Reagan, the Jews would not have come out of Russia. So I can't knock it. But that's the thing that we probably fought about the most, was the politics.
United States politics.
Yes, United States politics. We didn't discuss Israeli politics.
Jane.
I do this I can understand why people, you are a fabulous interviewer.
Thank you. I'm just trying to do something a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of facts, like all we have to do is Google Max Fisher.
Yeah.
But what we can't get in that Google is somebody talking about him, you know, from a different perspective. And that's why Eric, the head of the group that I work
Yeah.
with, asked me to interview you because, and it's the same thing with Lester. You know, it's just to get these very high profile people who know, everybody knows about them, but we want to try and give a different perspective, you know, a more personal.
Okay, well, if I didn't do well, you can come back.
Well. And actually, you know what?